Welcome back to the KDPG Sunday Edition. This morning we are discussing the potential impact of tariffs on foreign goods coming into the United States and what other countries might do to respond to those tariffs. Back with us is Dr. Gus Fauché, the Senior Vice President and Chief Economist for the PNC Financial Services Group. And we welcome Jay Sukitz, the Clinical Assistant Professor of Business Administration at the University of Pittsburgh's Katz Graduate School of Business. Mr. Sukitz spent more than 20 years as an investment banker at institutions like PNC, Salomon Brothers, E.F. Hutton and Company, Equilise, and Smith Barney. Thanks for joining us once again. You've been on the program before, Jay.
I have, yes.
The question which we did not get into with Chavin when she was here, and that is that the president, while imposing these tariffs, has also now, after pressure, decided that at least 2 countries, maybe more, will be exempt from these tariffs. Good idea if you're going to impose the tariffs? Bad idea?
Well, from the standpoint of what we're doing, it seems to me that it makes sense given the fact that Canada and Mexico are 2 of our most important trading partners. We know them really well. We haven't completed yet the negotiations on NAFTA. So that's a whole other issue that really comes into play here. Perhaps if there was a problem, let's say with NAFTA, and NAFTA would fall apart, maybe we would decide to impose some tariffs on steel coming from Canada and Mexico. The other thing is there's another provision that has been built into this proposal, which is to allow countries that are, quote, security partners of ours, like Japan, Germany, South Korea, to negotiate their way to a better deal, if you will, in terms of the tariffs. So it strikes me that that maybe the overall effect of this might be much more targeted rather than just an overall tariff on all steel.
I.e. China or some European countries as well.
Yeah, but as Gus said a little earlier, China's imports into the United States are about 6 or 7% of our total imports of steel. I think China has a much bigger effect into places like the EU than they do into the United States.
But if we're going to exempt some countries, and they want to say that we want to make up this gap that we have of what we're paying for that and what people are buying ours for, if you're going to exempt some countries, doesn't that mean that the tariffs might be a little bit even higher than the 10% or 25% on some of the other countries that they're going to impose a tariff on?
I mean, I think the rate is the rate. And so what I think, if we impose tariffs on some countries but not on other countries, that limits the price increases that American businesses and American consumers would face. So it would limit some of the damage from the tariffs. I think a lot of this is political theater, right? The president wants to appear like he's doing something on trade. At the same time, we don't want to hurt our trading partners, we don't want to hurt our allies, and so this is a way for the president to say he's helping these industries which have faced tremendous pressures, but at the same time limit the damage to the overall global economy.
It started out on Monday. This is on everybody. Everyone's going to, no exceptions. Oh, well, then maybe that, linking it to NAFTA, and then you can come to us with if you got a special deal, come talk to us. Yeah, political theater, or is he really a master negotiator who is doing that? This thing was rolled out with such,
Well, one of the things that always goes on here, and we don't see this. I would never try to understand or say about what happens behind the scenes, but there's all kinds of lobbying, number one, that goes on. The other thing that happens is that exemptions are made for at least in my way of thinking, for certain regions of the United States. And what I mean by that, if you actually look at the effect of imported steel into the United States, there are about 8 to 10 states that this would affect much more so than the rest of the country. Just as an example, Louisiana is, I think, the number 2 or 3 state in the United States in terms of the percentage of imported steel that they use as a total amount of the steel. And the reason why they use so much steel is because of all the offshore drilling and all the platforms that they build and all the construction that goes on in the oil exploration industry in particular. They get an awful lot of their steel from Mexico. It's an economical way to get steel from a very close neighbor. And so I think those considerations are taken into account as well. Believe it or not, the state that imports the most steel in the United States for their construction is Missouri. 40% of all the steel used in Missouri is imported. And so I think there's considerations also in terms of where the steel is coming from, where it winds up in the United States. And so it may very well be that when you look at the overall map and you see flows of imported steel coming in from Canada and coming in from Mexico, there also may be a very strong consideration.
Okay, that's it. We're invading Missouri. They've got to stop that right
now. I think that could be a strong consideration as well.
What about the, we'll call it the trickle-down effect of these tariffs, as Chavin was saying, that other businesses, other industries are going to be hurt by this. Do you agree with that?
Oh, I think that's the case, but I think the real question is how badly will they be hurt? I've heard estimates that on aluminum cans for beer, the cost would go up by 1 penny. And I've also heard that on the average cost on automobiles might be $40 to $50. So you've got to wonder, how badly will those industries be hurt? Certainly in construction, virtually everything that's done in construction, from roads to bridges to buildings, uses some form of steel. And so you could see the biggest impact there, especially with the fact that the president wants to announce this infrastructure program.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Gus?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's going to make downstream users of steel and aluminum are going to be paying more. It's not going to be obvious there. It'll result in slightly higher prices. I mean, again, this is a small piece of the economy. The big concern is that this could prompt retaliation and we can get involved in a trade war. And I think that's the bigger concern, and that could cause real long-run economic damage.
You brought up the next topic I wanted to get into.
Yes.
When we hear about this, a trade war, what would that mean?
Well, it would mean that so other nations respond by raising tariffs on goods that are imported into their countries from the United States, and then the U.S. responds, and so we see an increase in tariffs across the board. And that results in slower global economic growth. So it raises prices for consumers across all countries. They buy fewer things. That means reduced exports, so that slows on global growth, and it slows down U.S. economic growth. And that would be bad news for the economy, not in the near term, but over the longer run.
You already pointed out that the United States is probably more open than most other
Correct.
countries as far as allowing goods to be brought in without a tariff.
Mm-hmm.
So if other countries are already imposing tariffs on United States exports, what they're importing,
mm-hmm.
would it be that much of a bigger trade war than it already is, if I can call it is?
Well, we have again, the part of the issues behind this is we already impose tariffs on dozens and dozens of items coming into this country, from things like literally from peanuts
right.
to imported French cheese. We have tariffs on every bit of French cheese that comes into this country. This is not something new. This is not like as if somehow out of the blue imposing tariffs on steel is something very new. And as you mentioned earlier, India imposes 100% tariff on Harley-Davidson motorcycles.
That's what the country was.
Yeah. China imposes a 50% tariff on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. The EU has threatened perhaps to impose tariffs on Harley-Davidson motorcycles. It's a very complex web in terms of the way in which both these tariffs are imposed and then the effects that they actually have. But I would agree with Gus completely. We are perhaps the most open trading society in the world. I just read the other day that our average tariffs across the board on all imports amount to about 1.25% to 1.5%. That's all. And I think in many ways we've been played as a nation over the years because, let's face it, every manufacturer in the world wants to be in this market. This is the largest consumer market in the world. And so I think we have had situations where we've been taken advantage of over the years.
You agree?
Well, I agree that other nations have higher trade barriers. There's absolutely no question about that. But the solution is to get them to reduce their trade barriers, not for us to raise our trade barriers. Trade, it's not a zero-sum game. It's not if one side wins, the other side loses. It's a win-win situation. So I think we should encourage other nations to reduce their trade barriers, and we can reduce our trade barriers at the same time, even if they are more limited.
I want to move on to something else as far as the economy goes.
Please.
And that is on Friday, what most analysts are saying, a very good jobs report was released for the month of February with 313,000 jobs were being created. Is it that great of a jobs report?
I think it is. I think the U.S. labor market is in very good shape right now. So over the past 3 months, we've added about 240,000 jobs per month on average. I mean, that's a very solid number. Unemployment rate held steady, but that's because we have more people looking for work. That's a good sign. It's an indication that people are feeling more confident in the economy. So I think the labor market is in fantastic shape right now.
Jay, there's also concern that when you see these kind of numbers that you might see inflation take hold. Anything in this report that might discount that?
Well, you know, the one thing I think the market feared from the last labor report in February, the market feared the fact that it looked like wages were increasing a little faster than perhaps the market expected. This report looked like wages were rather benign in terms of their increase. And so, you know, there's always a fear in the marketplace. I know certainly when I worked in the markets for many years, there was always a fear of this sort of cost push or demand pool inflation kind of thing, depending on how you view it. And I think that's one of the reactions, that's part of one of the reactions that the bond market had when the 10-year went up 10, 15 basis points in that one day. I think this was a more benign report from the standpoint of wages. There was also something I think in this report that was extremely valuable, and that was finally the job or the labor participation rate started to tick up a little bit, which is really good. The one other thing, and this is something that most people don't see, and they tend not to see this because it's not reported very much, and that's the U6 unemployment rate, which is still stuck above 8%. And those are the people that have been unemployed for over 6 months or so.
Okay, great. We unfortunately are out of time. Thank you both for being with us this morning on the KDPG Sunday edition. And John and I will be back with some final thoughts in just a moment.